Here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. It's Martin Luther King Day. So I spent a lot of time reading the statements of people who evidently didn't understand what King was talking about, or willfully or ignorantly just, hey, sounds like a nice thing. We're going to throw it out on a meme so it doesn't make us look bad. It's kind of like how they butcher Thomas Jefferson a lot of the times. But, you know, our uber patriots on the right, they want to seem like they're not racists and all of that. So they all had their thing. And, you know, I as I'm reading through them, and there were, you know, tons of them, I'm going, you know, here's the thing. You can't misunderstand, misuse MLK quotes to make yourself feel better when you're standing against voting reform, when you're standing against making sure that every American has access to the ballot box. You just can't. And it's one of those things where someone needs to tell you, sit down, shut up. I mean, it's that kind of for me, it's that kind of a statement. But it's interesting to see our friends on the right who, on this day, who, you know, we're fighting tooth and nail against this day from ever happening, and have probably at points in the past mocked the fact that it is a day, putting out quotes of some kind of attempt at unity. I just find that, and Lauren Boebert being, you know, the one that caught me the most, because I don't even think she can spell Martin Luther King. But someone tweeted for her a quote, "The relentless pursuit of freedom that Martin Luther King Jr. possessed should be living on in all of us. Let us all remember the incredible life and legacy of this great American hero." And I'm going, I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm just not feeling that this is genuine. The whole, you know, hey, you know, we should be living, you know, the best life and we should all be free. That's good rhetoric, but your votes matter and your positions matter. And if you're standing in the way of allowing all people the right to vote, there's a problem. And we've seen in Republican states across this country, numerous states, this attempt to block people from getting to the ballot box through one measure or another. And I've spent some time, reading voting rights stuff. You go back to 2000 with the choice point throwing people off the rolls because they might be felons. Their names rhymed with one that might be a felon. In fact, one guy was going to commit a felony in like 7 years. So they preemptively knew he was going to commit a felony. So they just said, you know what, you can't vote now because we know what you're going to do. I'm not kidding with you on this. They literally had him thrown off the voting rolls because in 2007 he evidently was going to be committed of a crime. And this is the kind of stuff they've gotten away with every presidential election cycle. And you have to give them credit. They do hire the best, the smartest, the most able minds in the country to think of schemes to undermine our democracy. Whether it's throwing people of color off the voting list because they might be felons or their name might rhyme with a felon's name, all the way up through the caging that happened in 2004, to the voter ID stuff in 12, to, Chris Kobach and his commission, the KKK commission, to purge voters who haven't voted in a couple cycles. And to having people who were literally going through their neighborhoods. And this is where the right wing mobilizes people so much better because hate does this. Hate is a great motivator. This is how they got people in their communities going, well, these names don't sound like names that would be in our community. And they go and seek out whether these people are living in the neighborhood. One guy actually sent out, with his own money, letters to people in 6,000 homes more than that, in his area, and challenged the votes of 6,000 people in Virginia and tried to get them all thrown off the voter rolls. Why? Because he had nothing better to do. And yet most of the people didn't even know that that was happening. But I'll bet you today he's got a quote for MLK. I'll bet you. And this is the problem I have with where we are. We're in a moment in time that I think is really important. And it's not just the Republicans. I mean, I look at Kyrsten Sinema. I don't know how Kyrsten Sinema could have put out a tweet on MLK Day. I literally have no idea how that happens or why that happens. Because she's literally the one on the Democratic side, because you would hope they would be better. Her and Joe Manchin, who are stopping this from going forward. And this is one of those moments where, I've talked about this before, and I was sent an interesting tweet via direct message by a journalist by the name of David Roberts. And it's one of these things that, again, I've talked about the greatest generation in the past. But this David Roberts writes, the most striking thing about the entire pandemic to me is the raw, spontaneous, primal anger some people felt at being asked to make personal sacrifices in the name of the public good. A kind of gut-level anti-solidarity was his comment. And look, I see this in this moment as being all part of the same kind of scenario. Whether it's on the voting rights side, whether it's the pandemic, or it's anything. We've been splintered and moved and pitted against one another so efficiently and so well that there's no way together in this moment. And, when I was younger, I always pushed back against the labeling of my grandparents' generation as the greatest generation. We've all heard that the World War II generation, they were called the greatest generation. As I've gotten older, and now understand, here was my rationale. I believed that in moments of crisis, that in these moments of crisis that you don't have a choice. You're backed into a corner and you've got to fight your way out of it. You've got to somehow unite. You've got to come together and you've got to move forward. And I'll use 9/11 as an example. 9/11, no matter whether you voted for George Bush or not, you didn't hear anyone going, I want George Bush to fail. The day after 9/11, everybody was on the same page. Everyone was saying, we need to unite as a country. Now, Bush and the Republicans did everything they could do to tear us apart and continue that. But in that moment, we were reacting to our challenge. And I've always believed that. I had always believed it, that every generation rises to the challenge. That we all figure out how to come together, or there's not going to be a future. We don't have a choice, has normally been my argument. But I'll tell you, over the years, I've grown, I've matured a little bit, and I've realized that the idea of rising to the challenge together is not assured. It's not something that's guaranteed. It's not something that is going to happen naturally. It might not even be something that ever happens. And I look at our moment right now. We, in this day, are in that moment. In 100 years, when our great-great-grandchildren look back and they go, did they rise to the challenge of their day? Did they confront head-on the issues of the day? And I would answer no. And I look at this Roberts quote, saying, look, it's this raw, spontaneous, primal anger at being asked to sacrifice. I think back to my grandmother, telling stories about having to draw lines up the back of their calves with pencils because they didn't have stockings, because those were rationed. You couldn't get that stuff. How you couldn't get tires but every so often. How, rubber was, at a premium. There was no silk. There was none of this stuff. And how, as a society, they came together. They recycled their scrap metal. All kinds of stuff. And they didn't riot. They came together. and they met the challenge of their day. And I look at this and I go, we're in this moment not capable of it. Not capable of it at all. In fact, what we're doing as we speak in states all across this country is we're making sure that if there is a deadly variant around the corner, if something worse than Delta or Omicron or something comes down the pike that is going to be, as contagious but as deadly as the others, we're screwed, because we're not going to be able to rise to that challenge at all. Because we're putting into place laws all across this country to ensure that local governments can do nothing. It's all about hamstringing and handcuffing government's ability to react to crisis, to leaders being able to lead. It's all about the lowest common denominator dominating the conversation. The loudest, least educated, the bottom of the bottom, deciding what can or cannot be done. And that's a scary place to be. In 100 years, will we be looked back upon as the greatest generation? In this moment? No. Under no circumstance. Now, is it helpless? Are we helpless? Is this hopeless? Are we completely screwed? I want to say no. I want to say that we have the ability to move forward. I want to say there's better opportunities, there's better hope, there's a way that we're going to be able to somehow unite. And on this day, I think of Dr. King's legacy. I think of the idea of pulling people together, the unity, and more importantly, his belief that economics played a huge part in this, and why he was such a big proponent of the labor movement, and why the labor movement supported him. We can solve our inequality problems. We can solve all of our societal problems. I truly believe first in the workplace. Once you begin that stronghold of democratizing the workplace and making sure that people are treated with dignity and respect, are paid a fair and decent wage, and have opportunity for the future, I believe that they take that empowerment and they move forward into public life, like my grandparents' generation did. Now, unfortunately, all my grandparents are long since passed. But the memories of the stories that they told, the organizing that went on, the unity, the solidarity, the community that was built out of that, gives me hope that it's possible we can do it again. But looking at how our politics has become so hateful, and on a day where you're supposed to remember the legacy of someone who was fighting to pull us together, from the very people who are dividing us at every turn, they will invoke his words. I find that to be quite a struggle. So I guess my thought in this is, I want to live in the moment where we are the greatest generation. I want to live in the moment that we rise to the challenge of our day and look at challenges not as crisis or not as struggles, but as opportunities to do better. Take the reality of where we are and move forward. The fact of the matter is, you look at the massive inequality that's gone on in this country, and you slice dice however you have to, how we've been pitted against each other. Male, female, white, black, Hispanic, Latino, Asian, whatever. Sliced and diced. Whatever sexual orientation, however they can split us up. They've done so for the purpose of dividing our political power and ultimately our economic power, which is why income inequality has not been greater in this country's history. And globally, the pandemic has made it infinitely worse. And yet we're still arguing over nonsense. We're still being forced to fight over whether the last election was stolen, while there is real crimes to be investigated. We are definitely in an interesting moment. I keep coming back to it. Will this be the moment we rise to the challenge? Will we be able to look our grandchildren in the face and say, you know what, in this moment of turmoil, we fought for a better future. We fought for your future. Not sure just yet. hopeful. And I'll tell you, some of the emails that I've been receiving from people don't give me a lot of hope. So I'm hoping folks who are in the mind of we can do better, do send us emails and do communicate with us. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Also, you can download our podcast. Make sure you get a hold of that because, you know, I don't want to have to sell you beet juice in order to keep our program afloat. No beet juice because it's not great. So download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com. But at this moment, we have an opportunity. And for me, out of this moment, since the racial component is not my lane, it's not my alley, the economic part is. How we unite, I don't care whether you're white, black, Hispanic, male, female, gay, lesbian, transgender, I don't care what it is. The work that you do should be compensated well, with reasonable benefits, dignity and respect on the job, opportunity for all, and it should all be in a nice little written package. And how do we do that? Simply the way I've been fortunate enough my entire working life to be able to be employed with a union contract that lays it all out. Every working person in this country should have a union contract that pays them a living wage with life-saving health benefits and a retirement security package that makes sure that in their golden years, they're not eating cat food out of a tin can. I don't think that's too much to ask for in the wealthiest nation in the history of civilization at its wealthiest moment. I just don't think so. In this hour, we're going to talk a little bit about the Great Resignation, what's going on in the workplace, and why are so many people leaving the workplace. And also, Oxfam's got a new report out. New report, same as the old report. Inequality's bad and getting much, much worse. And thanks to the pandemic, it's really bad. I mean, really bad. So we got lots to get to, lots to talk about. Also, your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back, Bill McCamley is going to be here, former county commissioner, state representative, state labor secretary in New Mexico. He's got a new piece out on, well, just how bad it is to be a frontline service low-wage worker. And I think a lot of light bulbs there. Quick break, right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1898. That was the day workers in the textile mills of New Bedford, Massachusetts, walked out on strike. They were organized along craft lines into 5 different unions. Regardless of craft, mill owners inflicted a 10% wage cut, which would prove devastating given the fact that whole families worked in the mills. When the wage cut took effect, spinners effectively shut down 22 mills owned by 9 companies. Having formed an amalgamated strike committee, weavers, loom fixers, carders, and slasher tenders all stayed away in support. Workers' leaders like Samuel Gompers, Eugene V. Debs, and Daniel De Leon of the Socialist Labor Party all visited the strikers to give encouragement and inspiration. Debs alone acknowledged the role of women in the strike as workers, and not just as wives, mothers, daughters, or sisters. Before the strike, there had already been discord over strike demands. The weavers insisted on adding the fines issue. They constituted 40% of mill workers, and their job duties included correcting the mistakes of other trades. Manufacturers routinely fined weavers for material deemed imperfect, yet still profited from selling their products. The fine system wrought havoc on weaver families, and they wanted it abolished. The rest of the unions sympathized with their plight, but insisted the strike would fail unless they focused solely on the issue of wage cuts. The weavers persisted, and the demand stuck. By April, the strike collapsed. Workers went back with nothing gained. But the strike proved that workers across craft lines could strike and support each other in an industrial manner. It also proved that men and women workers could effectively organize a strike and picket together. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter @LaborHistoryIn2.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So we keep hearing an awful lot about, those lazy people. None of those lazy people want to none of them want to work. And I love hearing the employers who never miss an opportunity say, we just can't find workers. There's a worker shortage. You hear this in the trucking industry all the time. We got a shortage of a gazillion drivers. So we need to get 18-year-olds. We're going to put 18-year-olds in trucks and let them live like animals in sweatshops on wheels and pay them poverty wages to go all over the country. And that's somehow going to be the solution. And it's easy to blame the lazy people. My favorite one. It's the government's paying people not to work. You've heard that. The government's doing it. It's the bad government. Well, the reality is it's none of those. The reality is if you're having a hard time getting the people to come work for you, it's probably because you've got crummy wages and the working conditions are probably abysmal. Which is why I've asked my next guest to come share some thoughts on his journey. My good friend Bill McCamley was a former county commissioner, state representative, and state labor secretary in the state of New Mexico. He moved to Texas, took a bartender's course, going to go the easy route, going to become a frontline low-wage worker at a movie theater, slopping drinks, and the tale he's got to tell. That's why I've asked my good friend Bill McCamley to come talk with us. Bill, thanks for taking time for us.
Rick, thanks for having me on, man. I sure appreciate the opportunity.
So, I'm looking at this moment, and, we're in this weird kind of spot where all we hear is about, it's all those lazy people, Bill. Nobody wants to work. My generation, we knew how to work, but those people behind us, they don't know how to work. How accurate is that?
Well, Rick, my friend Jason, who is in Austin, actually wrote a book called Forget the Alamo, made it to the #1 spot on the New York Times bestseller list. He heard my story and asked me to actually write a little piece for him on his Substack page, which I did today, which is the reason I'm on here. So as you said, I was the secretary of the New Mexico Workforce Solutions Department, which is the state's labor department. And so during the pandemic, I was in charge of the unemployment office. And so we had to figure out ways of administering all those new programs that were coming out. And it was really difficult. Unemployment was designed in 1935, 36 for an economic situation, which is not the same today. And we can spend a whole other show talking about that if you'd like. But it got really hairy. I did that for 13 months of the pandemic, but there were some personal safety issues that came up where people were unhappy, death threats, terrorist incidents, all that work. So I really left the state. Ended up here in Austin. I've had a couple of contract jobs and everything, but I want to try to find something new. So I took a class at the Texas School of Bartenders. I always figured that'd be fun just for something to do. And I got recruited to go work at a movie theater as a bartender for the last 3 or 4 months. And after Jason heard some of the stories that were coming out of there, he asked me to write a piece that kind of looked at the juxtaposition of the two. And it's exactly what you're talking about. When I was in the office, you heard the same kind of thing from employers. People don't want to come to work. The kids are, not really wanting to come in, et cetera, and so on. And what we found, data is showing, is that older people are actually either retiring early or not coming back. Or the other big barriers are, for instance, women can't get childcare. And there's still a lot of concerns about COVID. Yeah. So go ahead.
No, you're right. And I'm just agreeing with you. It's, it's the same thing that I keep hearing. And look, coming out of COVID, I don't know if it's just people have turned mean, if we've forgotten how to deal with each other, if it's, we've always been kind of on the cusp of wanting to be mean, and now we have license. I don't know what it is, but, every time I go somewhere and I see there's always some kind of tense interaction that I don't remember pre-COVID as often.
Well, when I went to go work at the bar at this movie theater, so many things became clear that were not so when I was in my old office, just from dealing with people and working that job. First off, I came from a state and I was a part of this, raised the minimum wage. In fact, I think New Mexico is going to be up to $11.50 an hour this year as a statewide minimum wage. Here in Texas, it's still the federal minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. And so businesses, can sometimes think they can get away with doing that. And so the wages are very, very low for these jobs. There's no benefits. The movie theater I had, the benefit was go see a movie for free once in a while. You have half off of your meals and whatever. But, I got an Obamacare, thank the Lord, that exists, so I can get healthcare benefits, but that wasn't around. When you looked at the tips, I worked at a very wealthy suburb of Austin. And a lot of times, I spent a whole 5-hour shift one time at our outside bar. I made $3.85 in tips that night. Over Christmas, and the piece I actually put in, there was a person who had $102, I think it was, bill, tipped at $2. And that feels really bad because you need that money to live, because the wages are not high enough, especially in a place like Austin where expenses, especially housing, are really, really high. But it's really demoralizing as well to be like, hey, look, I'm busting my tail here. And let me tell you, the hours at this place, like the day after Spider-Man came out, everyone wanted to go see Spider-Man. I talk about in the piece. I worked a 1 to 8 shift from 2:30 to 8. I did not stop moving. I was washing dishes. I was carting glassware from the back, serving beer and wine, building drinks, sweeping up stuff, bringing drinks to people in their theaters. I literally could barely walk when I got home. So you're out there, you're busting your ass really, really hard. You're working. And then that sort of thing. And then a lot of times customers would show up. And let me just say this, like a lot of the customers, they were great. They were respectful. They were kind. But there seemed to be a lot more than you would think, that were taking whatever frustrations they had out in the world that you were just talking about on these workers. I worked with a bunch of high school students. And there was a guy on Christmas who literally threw this kindergarten-esque fit, like yelling and screaming at the top of his lungs in the middle of this movie theater at 5 o'clock in the afternoon on Christmas, because the entire kitchen staff for the theater had quit the night before on Christmas Eve. So we didn't have the burgers and the tacos and the pizzas that you would normally have. And I just wanted to be like, the reason that people are quitting these jobs, you can look right in the mirror and you're part of the reason.
No, you are.
And that's the argument in the pieces. Look.
No, and it is the experience of a lot of service industry workers who have gone through this over the years. And look, it was bad before the pandemic, but most people put up with it because, they eked out an existence and they were able to get by. But, once you go through this pandemic, I think there's been kind of an awakening that I don't need this garbage. Not for $2.13 an hour plus tips, which is the federal minimum wage for tipped employees. Same thing, here in Pennsylvania, it's a little bit higher. I think it's like $2.96. We're better than Texas. $2.96, Bill. That might get you to come up here, those extra pennies. But I think people have finally lived through this and gone, it isn't worth it. And there are other opportunities. People are going, you know what, maybe I'll take one of those Amazon or warehouse jobs. Maybe I'll do something else, one of these gig jobs that aren't great, but better than taking the abuse that I'm sure you've seen.
Well, you hit the nail on the head with that second part. That's exactly what I was seeing. There was a high school kid who was one of the best high school workers that they had. And it was really hard for them to get high school kids to work in this theater because the parents were really wealthy. So getting high school students who really didn't have to work to come work for, $2.38 or whatever an hour plus tips, or $7.25 if you weren't getting tips, was really hard to do. And he asked, and a lot of times it's not even about the money as much as it is about scheduling and flexibility. And one of the problems we saw is that the working conditions a lot of times were so crappy and the pay wasn't very high. And so people would quit. And then the people that were there were asked to work longer and they got more disgruntled, and it was a vicious cycle. And that's one of the reasons that the lead cook quit on Christmas Eve and most of his staff went with him. But this high school kid really wanted some time off over the Christmas holiday because his girlfriend was coming on in from Oklahoma City, wanted to spend more time with her, and they gave him full schedule. And he said, you know what, I'm not doing this anymore. And he also mentioned that the local grocery stores starting at $12, $13 an hour, and they gave breaks. In the place I was working, it was dead quite a bit, especially not during the holidays or whatever. But there would be times where it'd be 6-8 straight hours of just busting your tail, where trying to find a break to just go to the bathroom, not to mention scarf down some food, but just go to the bathroom was really hard to do because it was so damn busy, right?
Yeah.
And so he was like, I can go work in this environment where I'm making double what I'm making now. And if the tips aren't coming in to make up for it, I'm actually doing better. And I get breaks, and it's not as crazy an environment. So I think you hit the nail on the head that this isn't even a, hey, raise the minimum wage government stuff. This is if companies start understanding that good old Adam Smith invisible hand works both ways now, then maybe they'll actually start upping their salaries and benefits and such. And I think you're seeing Some companies start to do that. I know McDonald's raised their minimum wage, Walmart, et cetera, and so on. I mean, Costco is obviously probably the gold standard for these sorts of things, but workers have options. And they're starting to see, look, I can go to a place where I'm not going to have to put up all this crap. I was lucky, real lucky, that I didn't have to take that job for the money. You know, I took it for something to try to do and have a new experience. But even I didn't want to stay for that after 3.5 months. It was at least a half-hour commute each way with no traffic for $10 an hour. I'm like, you know, that's not something I really want to do. And here's the thing. The people that were out there that did need the money, there was one of the supervisors that actually could afford to live in the area. Everybody else was commuting from at least half hour away. So one of the managers was actually living with a roommate because housing prices here in the Austin area is so crazy, you know, 20 minutes south of Austin. So these are the sorts of things that you're seeing. And I think what it's revealing is that, as you pointed out, workers don't want to put up with this stuff anymore, and they're going to have options about where to go. So if customers really want to have an opportunity to see their movie or get their burger, and they're going to treat people like dirt and they're not going to pay tips, well, guess what? The workers are going to go somewhere else, and you're not going to have that business open anymore. I think that's unless the employer says, hey, we're going to pay you enough money to make it worth your while.
Yeah, or they get enough people to be able to meet the demand. And look, on Christmas, to see Spider-Man, you wouldn't have seen me anywhere near there. I don't want to deal with all the people that would have shown up, because you know a large percent of them, especially today, are just looking for an argument. And I'm sure when you throw in, I know Texas doesn't do a mask mandate, but I know locally, if I would just be waiting for the mask thing to come up, and you couldn't pay me enough to be a frontline service worker. And good on you for trying it, but I couldn't do it.
Well, I think that was the issue. Is you just see a lot of people are just pissed off at life right now for any number of reasons. But if you're going to take that frustration and anger out on some, 17-year-old high school worker kid or some 43-year-old guy out there slinging drinks, they're just not going to want to work for you anymore. They're just not going to want to do it. And once again, coming back to that argument, this is not about people not wanting to work. Younger people under the age of 50 and 60 are working at a very high percentage, but they're going to be able to choose, because of this vacuum of the older workers retiring, to go into those jobs where they're going to do better. And this is the argument that free market folks make all the time from the employer sector. Well, now the shoe's a little bit on the other foot. And I think that's a conversation employers are going to have to start, really having. Since the 60s, we've seen kind of worker power erode in this country. And now you might see it go up a little bit just because people are choosing to not put up with it anymore and go to places that value them.
No, you're absolutely right. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show. We're here with Bill McCamley. Bill's a former county commissioner, state representative, and state labor secretary in the state of New Mexico. He's got a piece out on, just what it's like to be a low-wage worker. His piece, he thought tending bars sounded like fun. Then the entire staff quit on Christmas Eve. Over at Jason Stanford's Substack page. We'll get links out on social media on how you can read Bill's piece. It is a fantastic read. But here's the thing, Bill, and this is what I've been seeing for a lot. We've been hearing a lot about the strikes that are going on. We've been hearing about a lot of the worker militancy that's going on. And I argue that in places like you were working at, if those places had a union, if those workers were organized, they wouldn't be quitting. They would be striking. Which is why, again, we need to have more people joining and forming unions, so that you don't have to quit, that you can stand and fight and make things better, and stand up to some of the problem customers that are there, and make management address those issues, because it's not good for people's health, not good for their mental health, and it's certainly not good for the economy of those working people. So for me, again, I think we solve all of our problems by expanding workers' ability to join and form unions.
Yeah, I mean, when I was in the political world, I was very pro-union. When you look at the power of unions over the course of history, when unions have more membership and are able to have these negotiations with employers, workers generally do better. But have you seen kind of the power of unions erode? You've seen those things going away. I do think it's also important, though, as you talked about, to talk about mental health and really talk about what this is like for someone who, frankly, might not be as lucky as me and might not have the opportunity to say, hey, look, I can just quit and go look for another job right now. I do think that we need to start having a conversation where we value what work is. And you talked about at the beginning of your show, how this is Martin Luther King Day. I think it gets glossed over a lot of times. And obviously his work on racial equity was so important to the progress we've made in this country. But people forget that he was just as passionate and just as strongly advocating for organized labor and for workers. And in fact, I think when he was actually shot, wasn't he actually, leading a union? Wasn't it a janitor's protest or something like that?
No, he was in Memphis for the sanitation strike.
Sanitation workers, that's right, yeah. So on days like today, it's important that we talk about the racial equity piece, but it's also important that we talk about the fact that he was this shining light to try to talk about the value and the dignity of work and how we have to do a much better job in this nation of really valuing people's sweat. And I think, once again, we've gotten away from that probably since the 60s, but I think this is an opportunity for us to really shine that light. And it's frankly one of the reasons I wrote the piece.
No, absolutely. And I've been saying for a long time, we've got to respect and put dignity and respect back into work. I don't care what you do for a living, for sweeping streets, digging ditches, the CEO of a company. All work has value. It's all should be rewarded. And for the most of us, it's how we support our families. So for me, I believe there's dignity in work, there's pride, there's self-esteem, and a living wage is part of that. So having, the kind of sacrifices that you're talking about, the kind of struggles that you're talking about for people who are just trying to get by while providing, I got to tell you, I've never been to a theater where they bring you the popcorn and the drinks to your seat. Wow. Good on them. Good on you for doing it. But I think you can get your butt up and go get it yourself.
Well, that's what started happening because they couldn't get the servers, frankly, to come in to do that. And I will tell you, man, you go up and down stairs because the theater we had was one of those new ones where you entered on the second floor and went downstairs to your seats. You run up and down those stairs delivering, pints of beer and these huge ass schooners of mixed drinks. First 2 or 3 hours, man, it's all right. Now I'm in decent shape. But man, that 5th, 6th, 7th hour, that starts wearing on.
No, there better be a tip on the other. And there better be a decent tip on the other side of that. But Bill, good stuff. I appreciate the piece. I hope folks will take a look at it. We'll get it out on social media. But great talking with you. Good to see you again. Hope you'll come back again real soon.
Keep up the good work, man.
Thanks so much. Our good friend Bill McCamley. No, we'll get links out on how you can take a look at his piece. And seriously, treat the people that come to work every day. Treat them decently. It's not that hard. Love to hear your thoughts. You got a story? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1915. It was the day that the people of Chicago stood up to demand an end to hunger and unemployment. Their stand began at a meeting at Bowen Hall, part of the Hull House complex founded by Nobel Prize winner Jane Addams. The number of unemployed had grown across the country due to an economic recession. A harsh winter had made the situation even more desperate in Chicago for thousands of out-of-work and homeless people. 900 people crowded into the hall for the meeting of the League of the Unemployed. More stood outside, straining to hear the speeches. One of the speakers was the fiery Lucy Parsons, the wife of one of the Haymarket martyrs. At the front of the hall hung a black banner emblazoned with one word in white letters: hunger. Those attending the meeting decided to march to City Hall to express their demand for work. Some in the crowd carried banners. One read, "Why starve in the midst of plenty?" Another demanded, "Give us this day our daily bread." This banner was fittingly carried by Episcopal priest John Tucker, known affectionately as Friar Tuck. 1,500 people marched that day, and with them they had a new anthem to sing as they marched. For the first time, Ralph Chaplin introduced his song, the labor anthem, Solidarity Forever. As the march made its way downtown, it was met by the Chicago police. Brandishing batons, the police dispersed the marchers. More than 20 were arrested, including Lucy Parsons and Friar Tuck. Now, more than a century later, Solidarity Forever is still sung when working people gather to stand up united.
Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever.
Like Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryinto.com.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So the new Oxfam report out, and this is the yearly report on inequality around the globe, and they make some suggestions on how we can close this massive inequality gap. And as I was reading through some of it, I'm going, this is just like last year and the year before and the year before and the year before and the year before and the year before, of course, and the year before that, of course, and only it's worse. And you go, how could it be worse than all? It's worse. As they point out, the 10 richest people in the world have more than doubled their wealth from $700 billion to $1.5 trillion. That is a rate of $15,000 per second. $1.3 billion a day thanks to COVID. And you look at this stuff and, it's just, we've made a new billionaire from March through the pandemic, from March of 2020 to November of 21, a new billionaire created every 26 hours. So yay for the billionaires. The only problem is on the flip side, as they point out, over 160 million more people have been pushed into poverty. So if you're on the side of the two economies, one for the very wealthy and, the rest of us getting screwed, welcome to the globe. And here to share some thoughts on the most recent Oxfam report, I've asked my good friend Matias Vernango to come talk with us. Matias is an economics professor there at Bucknell University. Matias, thanks for taking time for us.
Well, thank you for having me, Rick. So always a pleasure to be here.
So do you agree with my assessment? Same old report, same old stuff, only worse this time?
Yes, it's been coming. So the history of inequality is not complicated. It got better from the, basically the late 30s. It started slightly earlier, but, it really gets significantly better in the 30s, and it gets worse from the 80s. I wonder what happened through the 30s to the 80s that make inequality come down, and what happened through the 80s onwards that makes it consistently always worse. And so inequality, it has worsened. This report just brings those results, on a global basis. I should say there's some things that inequality is one of those issues that almost everything in economics is it's not really a science. It's the old joke from John Kenneth Galbraith is still sort of worthwhile. The economics, he said it for financial forecasting that it was created in order to make astrology look serious. But you can generalize that for economics. So economists are, it's in many ways it's an ideology of the elites to support free market economics and the policies that favor the wealthy. So they're not very good at telling you why inequality has gone up and so on and so forth and those things. But and so I'm sure you can find somebody to come here and tell you, oh well, it's not that bad. But part of the reason is that some countries in the periphery of the world, so China and India, have grown over the last 20 years, 30 years fast. And so you can still say, because of that, if you count all of the Chinese together, between countries, inequality has sort of not, has diminished somewhat in certain aspects. But, within countries, so in China itself, it has gotten much worse. So overall, it's terrible. The numbers are we're in a second Gilded Age. That's how bad it is.
Now they're arguing that what was the statistic? The number of 252 of the richest men on the planet have a combined wealth more than 1 billion women living in Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean combined. So basically, people you could fit into a good-sized room have more wealth than 1 billion people on this planet. And I'm sorry, I'm not seeing a distribution system that's actually working here. And the woman who was quoted from Oxfam, her name was Gabriella Bucher. She said billionaires have had a terrific pandemic and that the blame is neoliberalism. Surprise, it's exactly what we've always said it is going to be in her view.
Yeah, free market economics has, again, it's an ideology. It does serve up a purpose. So it's not surprising that this is going on. The only thing I would say, inequality is complicated thing to eliminate. So you can reduce inequality, but even that, it's complicated. So if you ask me how you get back to more reasonable levels of inequality, it's a complicated thing. What I think in the report, it's really painful, is that you see stuff like hunger, the number of kids that die of hunger and whatnot. And we just went through an experiment in the United States. So we started with for example, with the child tax credit to give money to, families that have kids. And, it's not a huge amount of money. It's $250, whatever it is. It's it's not a big check. And we got half of those kids or whatever. No, it's like 67%. I mean, don't quote me. I'm terrible with those things. But, we reduced brutally inequality in this country. So it's not that we don't know. So reducing hunger, it's something that it's doable. And I'll give you an example. I grew up in Brazil. So in many ways, I'm more Brazilian than, the country I was born, which is Argentina. And I've been here for 25 years. So I'm somewhat American at this point. My long transition from immigrant to redneck, it's my joke. So I've been here long enough. But my point is, so think of this. In Brazil, the government of Lula, he eliminated hunger. Brazil had the guy that is at FAO, the UN nation, United Nations organization that dealt with that. Eventually, was the guy that was the secretary of nutrition or whatever it was in Brazil. So because they eliminated hunger. So hunger is not complicated to eliminate. You give money to people to buy food and you eliminate hunger. Inequality is more complicated. Why? Because if you ask me, for example, did we eliminate inequality back in the 30s and 40s? How did we create a vast, working class that was middle class effectively? So it wasn't just one thing. We gave them education through the GI Bill. I mean, lots of problems. We didn't give it to African Americans. Women had less rights. So I'm not saying it was perfect. So God forbid, but it was better. And we did give them education. We give them rights, the right to form unions. We protected those rights, although we weakened them early on in 47 with right to work and so on and so forth. But there were a series of rights that were enshrined. There was a fear of communism that allowed the elites in this country to compromise, to say, wages can increase with productivity. So there were a set of policies. So it was a set of things. It wasn't just one thing. So we had very high tax rates for the very wealthy. So all of those things. So you don't need just one thing. That's the problem with eliminating and reducing inequality and eliminating poverty. Those are difficult things to do. Right. So I don't want to minimize and make it look like it's simple. Even if we wanted, even if we had the best president that we could, and he had all control of Congress and Senate, and it would be hard. But there are certain things, and that's what I'm saying. There are certain things that it's really painful. I mean, we really can eliminate the worst of hunger. We shouldn't have in this country people that, go to sleep, children that go to sleep that, haven't have enough food. That's unconscionable. That's unbelievable. And that's what this report shows, that we do have those things.
Yeah, and I would argue the report also shows it's policy that got us here. Because as you pointed out, you look at those things that my grandparents' generation fought for. Things like the GI Bill, things like the National Labor Relations Act, things like the Fair Labor Standards Act that raised the minimum wage, took children out of the mines, again, had their failings each and all, but in the right direction and did build the most prosperous working class in history. And here's the other part. We weren't perfectly equal, because anytime I talk about reducing inequality, everyone comes back to Matias, well, we're never going to be a perfectly equal country, and nor should we ever be, but we shouldn't be this unequal.
We weren't even equal opportunity. I mean, which, that there's an argument to be made here. I mean, this is not a philosophical discussion about fairness in society. This is not an academic sort of ivory tower sort of, this is things that have proven empirically in the real world to work. And part of the story is that, the Republican Party, and it's important to because there, of course, again, as I said, there were problems with the golden age and the period of the 40s and 50s and 60s in which things were going in the right direction, but they were going in the right direction. And there are lots of problems with the Democratic Party. But at least within the Democratic Party, there are forces that try to get those things right. The Republican Party at this point has used the wedge, a cultural sort of wedge, to make things worse. And the part that I think it's distressing for me to see is how much of working class people in the United States have bought into that discourse. The bitterness of this whole thing is that there is a significant amount of working class people that have bought into the argument that there's nothing to be done, and that the problems are whatever, political correctness, or I don't know, a lack of freedom because there are mask mandates or something along those lines. So it's concerning because we are going to have. As I'm a macroeconomist, so as you know, when you invite me more often than not to talk about the macroeconomy rather than poverty and inequality, we're going to tighten policy. So instead of the things that we talked in the last times, that we're going to expand the Build Back Better and expand some of these policies that have worked, as a way of reducing poverty, as a way of reducing things like hunger, in helping reduce inequality. It's less likely that we're going to do those things, and more likely that we're going to tighten, that people are afraid about inflation. And so I see, it's hard not to be pessimistic at this point. So, this report is just piling up on my sort of, my mood at this point.
No, I'm with you. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show here with Matias Vernango. Matias is an economics professor at Bucknell University. We're talking about the latest Oxfam report. That again, much like the last series of reports, bad, only this one much worse. Now, Matias, they did come out with some recommendations for governments to do some things. One of the things that they said is claw back a massive amount of the gains that the billionaire class reaped during this pandemic. Because as the woman said, reality is that the pandemic's been great for our billionaire class, and our billionaire class has been growing. So to take that money, invest it in things like education and healthcare and climate change and ending gender-based violence and all kinds of things in that way, tackle sexist and racist laws against women and racialized people. Also, end laws that undermine the rights of workers to join and form unions. And the other one, that wealthy governments like ours have to waive intellectual property rights over the vaccines to get these vaccines into poor developing countries, for not just for the reason that, and I would argue not for the reason just because we care about those people, but for the radical self-interest of, if we don't help them, it could boomerang around back to us. So this should have already been done, in my view.
Oh yeah, there's no doubt about that. I mean, the pandemic will not be over until we don't have everybody, in one way or the other, vaccinated or have gone through this, and it becomes endemic. So yes, I think that again, corporate power, does matter for inequality, and that's that's the notion of a gilded age. I say this as a joke, but think of this. I always ask my kids in class there at Bucknell, tell me the name of millionaires of the Gilded Age of, back then. And they all know names. They know the Vanderbilts and the, Rockefellers and whatnot. And I tell them, give me names of the current ones. And they all know they're, Bezos and whatever, Bill Gates is and so on and so forth. And then I ask, tell me the name of a millionaire of the 50s and 60s. And they don't have names. And you know why they don't? Because there is no iconic millionaire of that era. And, that should tell you something about, seriously. And so there is something to be said about doing those things. But I think also, even, those would be difficult things to do to get, we're not going to get to 90 marginal tax rates to these people. But I want to emphasize this because I think it's important. The American government is not broke. Debt is in domestic currency. I come from Argentina. Our debt is in foreign currency. That's broke. We're broke. We depend on the IMF. The IMF, this is big, perhaps as big as the vaccines. The IMF should be giving money away. And the U.S. has a lot of power, and Biden has a lot of power in, moving that away, in that direction. But the U.S. doesn't need even to tax the wealthy. We should tax the wealthy, but we can spend on those. There is nothing. The size of the tax, child tax credit in comparison to what we spend on the military it's tiny. So the fact that we don't do that, it's criminal.
Yeah, no,
so
I'm right.
Should be doing those things.
I am right there with you. It is criminal, and the fact, and this is where I've talked about a number of times. We're talking about $250 a month that changed the lives. I mean, literally changed the lives of so many
Get
people.
people
Going,
out
how
of
do you not do that?
poverty. Children out of poverty. It's infuriating. To tell the truth, it's infuriating. So it's hard not to get angry about this kind of stuff.
No, I mean, it's nuts. So let me ask you last kind of line of questioning on this, because, ultimately we see this report every year, and ultimately it basically makes us, pay attention for a couple of days, and then it collects dust on a shelf. Is this year any different?
Election year, so we're in the middle of waiting to see what we'll be able to pass in terms of fiscal policy. We just reinstated Mr. Powell, who is, I'm sure, a decent man and none worse than any of the other, recent chairmen of the Fed that we have had. That is saying we're going to tighten monetary policy. We're obviously clear that not only we're not going to pass, let alone fiscal policy, not do anything about voting rights. So it seems that the possibilities of passing more radical legislation regarding things like taxes for the wealthy or extending, poverty programs and so on and so forth are very limited. So as I said, it's very hard to look at the current situation and not be despondent. All the things that I've read have been comparing negatively Biden with Carter. And again, Carter was a decent man, and we wish we had somebody. I mean, again, it's not comparable to Trump. So I'm sure Biden does care about the things we were just talking, but it doesn't seem he will have the tools to make the difference.
And it all comes back down to 2 Democrats and 50 Republicans. At the end of the day, while I beat up on Manchin and Sinema, the reality is there are 50 Republicans that are standing by as children are going to go to bed hungry tonight because they couldn't get something passed through. And to me, that to use your word, that's criminal.
It's criminal.
That's simple. Matias, I appreciate the time. As always, great talking with you, my friend.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Our good friend Matias Vernango, professor of economics there at Bucknell University. I mean, seriously, the fact that we are in the wealthiest moment in this country's history, and yet $250 could change the lives of so many people. And we learned that. But that was one of those things we knew. And what we also know is no matter what they claim Joe Manchin said, that they just spend the money on drugs and booze and stuff, people spend it on what they needed: food, child health care, medicine. That's what they used it for. I'd love to hear your thoughts, though. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Make sure to download our podcast so I don't have to hawk any beet juice. Thanks so much. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this date in labor history, the year was 1915. On this date, the most popular labor song in the United States was completed in Chicago. Ralph Chaplin, an industrial workers of the world activist, artist, and writer, was in town for a demonstration against hunger. He finished writing Solidarity Forever, a song he had started working on the year before at a miners' strike in West Virginia. Set to the popular tune John Brown's Body or the Battle Hymn of the Republic, the song became the anthem of the U.S. labor movement. Solidarity Forever continues to be a staple during countless union meetings, on picket lines, and May Day and Labor Day events throughout the nation. Also on this day in labor history, the year was 1963. On this day, President John F. Kennedy signed Executive Order 10988, which recognized the right of federal employees to join a union. The 1935 Wagner Act, which had ensured the right to organize a union, had excluded federal employees from that protection. Although they won the right to organize, under Kennedy's order, federal employees were denied the ability to go on strike. Even with this limitation, this executive order is considered very important in U.S. labor history. Not only did it allow federal employees to unionize, it also helped light a spark for public sector unionism at the state level. Today, approximately half of all union workers are in the public sector.
When the union's inspiration through the workers' blood shall run, there can be no greater power anywhere beneath the sun. Yet what force on earth is weaker than the feeble strength of one? But the union makes us strong. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com. Like us on Facebook and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
1-866-416-RICK, 1-866-416-7425. Thoughts, questions, comments. What do you think of the Oxfam report? Does it matter? Does it matter that inequality has grown to the kind of levels that we're seeing? In fact, they're saying, the Gilded Age has got nothing on us right now. And globally, it's even worse than that. Some of the stuff that comes out of it is just remarkable. That they point out that women collectively have lost about $800 billion in earnings just in 2020 alone, and that there are 13 million fewer women in the workforce now than there were in 2019. And look, again, more than 160 million people globally have been pushed into poverty because of this pandemic. Now, according to their calculations, a one-time 99% tax windfall on the gains of the fortunes of just the top 10 wealthiest people would be able to pay for the manufacturing of the world's COVID vaccines and be enough to fund public works projects, universal health care, and social protection for millions of people all around the globe, and still leave them with $8 billion more than they had before the pandemic. So they're still going to be rich. They're still going to have all the money they had before the pandemic. They just don't get the profit off of our misery. And this is the ultimate, this is the ultimate capitalism. The wealthy get wealthier, and everybody else, not so much. And you wonder why there's such anger out there, because people are struggling. Work is getting much more difficult. You're on that treadmill, like the hamster on the wheel, man, just trying to keep up. And every day there's something that gets in the way. Every day there's something that, crazy. Here's a story. Rand Paul has canceled his DirecTV subscription. And I'm like, why do I care if Rand Paul watches DirecTV? I mean, honestly. And then I found, evidently DirecTV dumped One America News. And I'm going, well, that's interesting. Good on for DirecTV for that, because look, One American News they've got a lot of problems legally going on, so I'm not surprised. I'm also not surprised that maybe they're kind of DirecTV's worried that they might get pulled into it. But Senator Paul is angry, and he said, "Why give money to people who hate us?" And look, One American News is one of those, in my view, one of those misinformation channels that just we could do without. We really, really could. Anyway, let's go to the phone lines. We got Alice on line 1. Alice, how are you?
I'm good. How are you, Rick?
I'm not going to complain too much just yet.
Oh, well, I wanted to comment on a couple of things. I've been working on my family tree for about the past couple of months. I do this off and on for the past 15 years. But the reason why I'm bringing that up is I get to go through a lot of history. And the one thing I've noticed is when you have times like these where you have the wealthy and the conservatives seizing power, there's always a backlash at some point because they lose control. I've noticed this. The conservatives lose control and the whack jobs rush in, and they generally start off by doing in the wealthy, and then they do in their conservative nut jobs because obviously they're not nutty enough for them. So I think we're about due for one of those.
No, I agree. I think we've gone too far off the rails.
Oh, absolutely. This reminds me seriously of the English Civil War, just before the English Civil War, when all the stuff was going on, and then Cromwell seized power. And after he died, they brought back the royalty, I guess, and everyone just totally disregarded the religious nonsense. So I'm thinking, yeah, we're about there.
Yeah, no, there are ebbs and flows. I mean, we've had crazy in our past, and that's why there's still some hope in me that we've seen crazy times before, and we've seen this kind of consolidation of wealth before. It's just a matter of working people finally waking up and stop being divided, and stop being dividable. More importantly.
Oh, absolutely. You know, I think I've told you before, I live in a little hamlet that's in a very rural area. And there's tons of Trump supporters around me. And they're always going off on tangents on, well, you know, those unions are so bad. And I just roll my eyes anymore because I thought, you know, I'm not going to waste my breath.
Yeah, well, we work on the people we can influence, and we leave the fives, leave them to themselves. That's where my mindset is.
True. At least they got rid of OAN News on a couple of channels. So you have a great evening.
Thank you so much, Alice. I appreciate the call. As always, 1-866-416-RICK, 1-866-416-7425. You know, and look, you know, the reality is, and you know, she's not wrong here. Crazy gets so far, and then, you know, finally people wake up and go, oh, maybe that was too far. That's what I'm hoping is going to happen at some point, which is why I'm hoping that the whole Trump thing finally, you know, there's something that comes around. But it comes back to the information that we're getting, and I look at the fact that Rand Paul has dumped DirecTV because they dumped One American News. I would say this is part of the misinformation machine. Maybe possibly being dismantled, or maybe just the fact that there are way too many lawsuits for DirecTV, and this was purely a business decision. Now I look at the fact that we're in this moment where Massachusetts, evidently starting today, is going to be limiting the number of surgeries that they're going to allow in hospitals. Why? Hello? They're seeing a massive surge in the virus there, and I guess up to 2,000 surgeries scheduled per week, or 40% of the hospital system's usual total, could be affected by the Mass General policy that's going on right now. And you go, yeah, this is what happens when you don't prepare. This is what happens when you have so many people who are going, no, I'm better than that, or no, it's over, and we can go and have big displays. The unvaccinated are filling our hospitals. The misinformation machine is most certainly feeding this in an enormous way. And over the weekend, Trump did his little song and dance in Arizona. And I love this one. He's telling the people in Arizona that the left's now rationing life-saving therapeutics based on race, discriminating against, and denigrating white people to determine who lives and who dies. And you go, wait a second. If it's me and you haven't been vaccinated, I'm going to give whatever therapeutics to the person who's vaccinated. I'm going to do that. That's just, if we're going to ration, that's the first part. He goes on to say that you get it based on race. In fact, New York State, if you're white, you have to go to the back of the line to get medical help. If you're white, you go right to the back of the line, he said, which again is meant to stir up these race angers, to get people all bunched up in the panties. And that's not what it says at all. It says that you have to take things into account based on certain racial outcomes in divvying out scarce resources. And, you know, this is one of those things where the doctor then decides who is, and this is where I wouldn't want to be the doctor, who's going to have a better chance of recovering, who's going to have the better outcome. We have a scarce amount of a precious resource, something that could save your life. Are we going to use it on somebody who might survive, or are we going to waste it on, well, we tried? And this is where you go, hello, I wouldn't want to be in either. I don't want to be in any of that situation had we just done the right thing. And I look at the U.S. Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy. Dr. Murthy says that going to be a tough couple of weeks. The next few weeks going to be tough. Why? Because we expect more. We expect this to get worse. In fact, on average, we've been averaging over 800,000 new cases a day. Hello, things getting worse. Hospitals are full, are filling up all across the country, and our healthcare system is, well, almost to the point of where, well, in Massachusetts, they're not going to be doing other surgery. Half up to 40% of the other surgeries, and at some point, going to shut them down. This is not good. And why? Because, well, as the guy on TikTok said, well, you know, if you get the vaccine, you could get sick and you could get COVID and you could die, but at least you'll be vaccinated. And you go, no, dum-dum. Most of the people who are dying are the unvaccinated. This is now a crisis for the unvaccinated, which is why I've said, you know, I'm not all that concerned. But I am concerned about what these people are doing in state legislatures across the country. And as I said earlier, we're setting it up to where if another strain comes that's just as contagious as Omicron and deadlier than Delta, we're going to be handcuffed and not able to respond to what is going to come. And that's what's frustrating. And look, you know, the virus as well. You know, this whole pandemic has shown the kind of inequality that we have. The outcomes for the folks at the top have been fabulous. They've been doing well. They're not the ones getting sick, and when they do, they're getting the top therapeutics. You know, you think about some of the stories of you know, people who got the early Regeneron, I think it was called, where, you know, average working people, maybe not so much. And now you're looking at the fact that, you know, there are still millions of people in this country who don't have health insurance. And you think there could be policies. There could be policies that move us in a direction that makes lives better. And yet we don't seem to do it. Today, Glenn Youngkin, the governor of Virginia, he wrote on Twitter, "We can take inspiration from Dr. Martin Luther King's life, which we celebrate today, and his words that, quote, we may have all come on different ships, but we're in the same boat now." And that's a unifying kind of message. You know, it really kind of is. Only I would argue that the Youngkins in the world aren't in the same boat with the rest of us. I would argue that the billionaire class not in the same boat with the rest of us, and certainly not the people who got Youngkin elected. You know, as I said, if we want to start moving towards King's vision, it starts in the workplace. Equality starts in the workplace. We can make those changes. But I do think it's interesting that on day one you had Youngkin sign 11 executive actions in one day, 9 executive orders and 2 executive directives. And yeah, they were the same. They were the political pandering stuff. The first one was obviously, you know, we're going to deal with that theory about race. That's critical. We're not going to allow them to teach, you know, things about critical and theories that are racial. Not going to do that. So that's executive order number 1. Number 2, he's going to empower, you know, parents to decide whether children get to infect their classmates in class by having to wear a mask or not. Not the teacher or the school, parents. The parents want everyone to see the kids' bright new teeth and be able to breathe on their classmates. They can do that. Never mind your ability to keep your kids safe. Never mind. The third executive order, they say going to restore integrity and confidence in the parole board. I got to wonder which of his friends didn't get parole. He goes, there's another one to promise to investigate any wrongdoing in Loudoun County because, hey, that's where the Democrats live. That's where they voted for the wrong guy. So we're going to go make their lives miserable for the next 4 years. Executive order number 5 says that day 1 promised to make government work for Virginians. They're going to have a chief transformation officer, and he's going to figure out how to screw everything up. So that should be fun, too. Good on you, Virginia. Number 6 is declaring that Virginia is open for business. I'm not 100% sure what that means, but I'm assuming it's tax cuts and deregulation. I'm just kind of throwing that out there. Number 7, he's going to combat and prevent human trafficking. kind of support that, but I'm not quite sure what it means. But it's a nice one, I guess. He's going to, for his 8th one, set up a commission to combat anti-Semitism. I'm not sure who he's looking for. I gotta not think he's looking to his supporters, but we'll see. Also, he is going to pull Virginia out of the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. That was a number of states here in the Northeast that were coming together to do something about climate change. So no more dealing with that. 2 of his executive directives are going to cut regulations by 25% and going to rescind the vaccine mandate for all state workers. So, So, again, in a month or so, if the numbers start blowing up there in Virginia, at least we know which executive orders and executive directives we can go back to look at and go, hey, here we go. So there is that. But on the education front, and this is one of those interesting things, Democrats just don't seem to know when to get out of their own way, because basically they lost on the message of the theory of critical race thing stuff, and the Republicans were able to scare parents into thinking, oh, they're gonna indoctrinate my children with all this self-loathing, and that's not the school's job. That's the parents and religion's job. But the Democratic Party of Michigan put out on Facebook just a dumb thing to say. The meme said, not sure where this parents should control what is taught in school because they are our kids is originating, but parents do have the option to choose to send their kids to a hand-selected private school at their own expense if this is what they want and desire. The purpose of public education in a public school is not to teach kids only what parents want them to be taught. It is to teach them what society needs them to know. The client of the public school is not the parent, but the entire community, the public. And while I agree that kids need the socialization, I believe that's part of it. I believe we should all have common values and common understanding of our history. And those things, we should all have a minimum standard of knowledge so that we can participate in the economy. This was freaking stupid to say. And it's like anything. When you find yourself in trouble, when you're digging yourself a ditch and you want to stop digging deeper, stop digging deeper. Don't do this. And ultimately, why did you delete it? Should have just left it, because I got a screenshot of it. Stupid. Love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Make sure you go to get our podcast at thericksmithshow.com. Always there for your entertainment. Quick break. Right back. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1898. That was the day workers in the textile mills of New Bedford, Massachusetts, walked out on strike. They were organized along craft lines into 5 different unions. Regardless of craft, mill owners inflicted a 10% wage cut, which would prove devastating given the fact that whole families worked in the mills. When the wage cut took effect, spinners effectively shut down 22 mills owned by 9 companies. Having formed an amalgamated strike committee, weavers, loom fixers, carders, and slasher tenders all stayed away in support. Workers' leaders like Samuel Gompers, Eugene V. Debs, and Daniel De Leon of the Socialist Labor Party all visited the strikers to give encouragement and inspiration. Debs alone acknowledged the role of women in the strike as workers, and not just as wives, mothers, daughters, or sisters. Before the strike, there had already been discord over strike demands. The weavers insisted on adding the fines issue. They constituted 40% of mill workers, and their job duties included correcting the mistakes of other trades. Manufacturers routinely fined weavers for material deemed imperfect, yet still profited from selling their products. The fine system wrought havoc on weaver families, and they wanted it abolished. The rest of the unions sympathized with their plight, but insisted the strike would fail unless they focused solely on the issue of wage cuts. The weavers persisted and the demand stuck. By April, the strike collapsed. Workers went back with nothing gained. But the strike proved that workers across craft lines could strike and support each other in an industrial manner. It also proved that men and women workers could effectively organize a strike and picket together. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at laborhistoryin2.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So let there be fun. This is one of those questions that I come back to. We're now finding out. That in states across the country, you've got Georgia, you got Nevada, you got Michigan, Arizona, Wisconsin. You've got these states that evidently we're now finding out had submitted forged state certificates for the electoral vote. 5 states that we know of right now. And my question is, how is it we're only finding this out now? How is it that right now we're only now learning of the fact that these were submitted? Now, for those who remember, there was talk of this around the time of the election. There was talk that this could happen. There were people who had floated the idea of holding, alternative elector meetings and sending a different delegation. There was talk here in Pennsylvania about it as well. It didn't happen here, as I understand, but there was talk about it. And this is one of those things where you go, how is it that in 5 states you had people who submitted these things and didn't get arrested immediately? Because here's the thing, if you got 2 of them, I'm sure the people who were, in the House, who were the folks who were the National Archives going, well, which one's real? I'm sure they knew the ones that eventually found out which one was real, submitted that to Congress, and then they were holding one that was forged. It's illegal. It's a crime. Why? Why are we, over a year away from holding anyone accountable? And now we're asking the question, is this a crime? Of course it's a crime. Not only is it a crime, I believe it is a conspiracy. And I don't jump on the conspiracy bandwagon easily. It's rare you get me to jump on the, oh my God, the sky's falling, it's a conspiracy, everyone's in on it. No, it's rare you get me in on that. But, what we have learned, the Eastman memo, the PowerPoint presentations, all of the people who were read in on this idea of not certifying the election on January 6th, and then having it revert back to the House of Representatives, so that not that every congressperson gets a vote, but that every state gets a vote based on their congressional delegation. And Trump was here in Pennsylvania days after, the election, saying just that's the route that they were looking for, that's what they were considering, that's what they were working for. If they couldn't steal the votes in Georgia, they couldn't get, secretaries of state to dig in the couch cushions and find votes and commit actual voter fraud, then they were just going to have to figure out another way to steal the election. And this is one of those things that, again, as, my mother always said, if someone's accusing, someone's accusing someone of something and doing it in a really tough way, chances are they're the ones who did it. And you look at how Republicans have gone all in on this big lie. They're all in. Is it possible that really they're the ones who were trying to steal the election and it backfired? And now they've gotten caught, and now they got to double down. Love to hear your thoughts. 1-866-416-RICK, 1-866-416-7425. But Georgia, Nevada, Michigan, Arizona, Wisconsin, all states where there are forged documents. And you go, how is that possible? Without it being, is this something where you go, no, Rick, just people in each of those states had the same idea at the same time, and they all decided that that's what they were going to do. And it was purely an act of God. It wasn't Donald Trump. It wasn't Steve Bannon. It wasn't Roger Stone. It wasn't Stephen Miller. It wasn't the son-in-law. It definitely wasn't Dumb Jr. I'm definitely not going to give him credit for anything in the conspiracy, and I doubt he was even read in. But the other one either. I think the youngest kid was probably read in before Dumb Jr. or Eric. Just kind of throwing that out. But how can you not look in these moments and see all of this stuff that so far is now just coming out? And I'm going, why now? How come this hasn't been out for months? And this is where I blame the Democrats. And look, I've gotten some emails from folks, and thank you for shooting me the emails, taking me to task over being too critical of Merrick Garland and being too critical of the Democrats. I fully understand. Garland has to build his case. It's a slow, methodical process. I get that. My problem is the political side. And I said this from the beginning. The fact that Democrats and Benny Thompson and the whole committee should have been started that night. They should have done this the night of January 6th. As soon as the vote was certified, they should have pulled together a committee and moved forward that day. And every time this stuff comes up, it should have been put on the table. We should already be perp walking people. And look, I'm glad that Stewie is finally getting his recognition, the Oath Keeper co-founder. I'm glad Stewie's finally getting some attention for his seditious conspiracy. I want a bunch more. And maybe it's just I'm greedy. Maybe it's just that I'm angry that the reputation of this country is now so badly soiled. The legacy of this nation, the incredible part of the soul of this country is the fact that we've done things that no other nation in the history of civilization has done. We saw the first bloodless change of ideological power in the history of civilization. And I say, look, John Adams was our greatest president. I put him out there, not because he was a good president, because he was actually not great at all. Alien and sedition acts, cannons firing off every time he came into town. Very arrogant guy, from what I've read. But what makes him great is that when he lost, he left. He gave up the reins of power. Now, he did it like a thief in the night, angry, brooding, and stormed off, but he left, which gave us the ability to move this country forward and to have transition after transition. And yes, have there been spasms throughout the history? Absolutely. Have there been times where the soul has been tested? Most certainly. Where the steel of the spine has maybe been bent a little bit? Yes. But this, something entirely different. My view on this is something that's been boiling in think tanks across this country on how we can usurp the will of the people. Because in the original intent world, the people were only supposed to vote for the House of Representatives, the people's house, where the passions rage. We weren't supposed to directly vote for senators, where the upper chamber, more deliberative. We can listen to the rage of the people in the House, and they can be all, pants on fire and hotheads. But the upper chamber, that's where things are going to be. That's where things are going to be more civilized. And we still don't vote for the president. We vote for electors who vote for the president. because the founders did fear we the people and democracy. And I'm sure there were people in these think tanks going, hey, how do we get around that democracy thing? How do we get around that vote? Because look, the folks on the right, the Republican voters, seem to be okay. They do. They seem to be perfectly okay with authoritarianism. They seem to be okay having a strong arm, totalitarian dictator type in office. They seem to be perfectly okay with it. In fact, they loved Trump for that. So they would be okay with it as long as they're going after the right people. And you know who those are, right? It's those people. The ones we're all supposed to be. And you put yourself into whatever subcategory you want. I'm not saying it's one group or another. It's the ones that they use to tell us who we have to hate or who we're opposed to or who we have to be separate from, so that we never come together and find common interest. Which is why, as I've always said, for me, the one common interest the vast majority of people in this country have is their work, is how they make their living, is how they pay their bills, how they take care of their children, the roof that they're able to put over their heads. But policy doesn't seem to matter anymore. And this is a huge win for the wealth class of this country, because we're no longer pursuing policy to make lives better. If that were the case, the $250 per kid child tax credit would have sailed through. And if we couldn't get it in the bigger bill, in the Build Back Better plan, someone would have already moved on it to make sure that check wasn't missed January 15th. So that those families who needed that resource would be able to put food on the table in the coldest months of the year. But we didn't do that. We hung them out to dry. And then everybody else, well, you're just going to have to pay that back come tax time. Because the IRS is going to send you a thing that you're going to have to declare on your taxes. So you're not going to get as big a refund at the end of the year. Instead of saying, no, we need to get people the resources to make sure that we can deal with childhood poverty. We can end that. I mean, Matias Vernango was right. It is criminal to have a system that benefits a gazillionaire class. 10 people who pocketed $1.5 trillion, who saw their wealth expand to $1.5 trillion over the pandemic, while seeing globally 160 million more people go into poverty. And here in this country, we had smart policy cut our childhood poverty in half. That is until January 15th. And I don't blame Joe Biden for that one single bit. I blame Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema, but I also blame 50 Republicans who not one of them had the courage to come forward and say, yeah, I'll vote for that. Not one of them came forward and said, let's get a bipartisan bill just to move that one single part. And I'll bring 10 Republicans along so we can get it passed. Because in a functional democracy, this is how this stuff would work. You go, okay, those are things we agree on. Let's get that done. And let's get it done in a bipartisan way. Because remember, Republicans always tell us they're the party of family values. They're the pro-life family. And I always think of George Carlin when I think of that. If you're the preborn, you're okay with the right. But if you're after you're born, you're blanked. You can't use the colorful language of the George Carlin on terrestrial radio. But I think it says a lot for where we are as a country right now. And I think it shows a lot of where the moneyed interest in this country have taken us. It's angering, it's frustrating. And this is where I have hope. That if we can come together, and I keep saying this, working class people need to put down the barriers. Find those things that unite us. And I don't care what your identity or your subdivision is. And I think, look, on the left, we need to stop doing that as well. I don't care. I don't care how people identify. Every person in this country has the right to life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. That's simple. No one's better than anyone else. No one's worse than anyone else. We're all in the same boat. We're all moving on the same journey. And, I've had this conversation with my son recently a lot. Because it's like, how are things when you were a kid, Dad? And I'm like, well, the reality is it didn't matter who we were. I lived in a very diverse neighborhood. I was a minority in a minority community. I was the white kid in a black neighborhood who got beat up every day. But we had friends of, every ethnicity. And, everybody was something. And we were all bullied, and we were all had, nicknames and all of this. But we were all in the same boat. And it didn't matter. We figured out how to get along. We figured out how to unite around common ideas. The more we slice and dice ourselves, the harder it is to draw us together. And that's my frustration at this moment. The right loves the fact that the left is splintering themselves among themselves. And until we can figure out how to do that, well, they're going to continue to do what they do and, well, worse. Now, the story today, Ann Coulter, the evidently a former Trump supporter, she says that Donald Trump's done and that the New York Times should stop obsessing over him. And I agree. I agree that everyone should stop obsessing over him. I'm watching the fight between him, DeSantis, and how the Republican Party is splintering themselves for who's going to be the Trump replacement. Will it be a Josh Hawley? Will it be a Ron DeSantis? It's not going to be Ted Cruz. The right doesn't even like Ted Cruz. But how crazy will they go? How far off the edge? That's where this fight's going to be very interesting because Trump went after DeSantis. DeSantis went after him. Evidently, privately, Trump mocked DeSantis for being a dull loser. I'm waiting for the pie fight. And the hope is that Democrats get their act together, get some legislation passed, and start talking about back to talking about the real issues. I'd love to hear your thoughts, though. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Going to take a quick break right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1915. It was the day that the people of Chicago stood up to demand an end to hunger and unemployment. Their stand began at a meeting at Bowen Hall, part of the Hull House complex founded by Nobel Prize winner Jane Addams. The number of unemployed had grown across the country due to an economic recession. A harsh winter had made the situation even more desperate in Chicago for thousands of out-of-work and homeless people. 900 people crowded into the hall for the meeting of the League of the Unemployed. More stood outside, straining to hear the speeches. One of the speakers was the fiery Lucy Parsons, the wife of one of the Haymarket martyrs. At the front of the hall hung a black banner emblazoned with one word in white letters: hunger. Those attending the meeting decided to march to City Hall to express their demand for work. Some in the crowd carried banners. One read, "Why starve in the midst of plenty?" Another demanded, "Give us this day our daily bread." This banner was fittingly carried by Episcopal priest John Tucker, known affectionately as Friar Tuck. 1,500 people marched that day, and with them, they had a new anthem to sing as they marched. For the first time, Ralph Chaplin introduced his song, the labor anthem, Solidarity Forever. As the march made its way downtown, it was met by the Chicago police. Brandishing batons, the police dispersed the marchers. More than 20 were arrested, including Lucy Parsons and Friar Tuck. Now, more than a century later, Solidarity Forever is still sung when working people gather to stand up united.
Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever.
Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
I still love that, the Trump attacking DeSantis. He's a dull loser. It's exactly, isn't that not exactly what you would expect from Donald Trump? That kind of response. You're a dull loser. But the good thing is, like I said, I think Ann Coulter may be right. I think he may be done. The rally over the weekend, so the craziness you would expect, but it wasn't. I'll be honest, I didn't think it was all that I was expecting. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on, well, maybe is Trump done? Is the future, the other crazies? I've asked our good friend, former Ohio Congressman, political analyst Bob Ney to come share some thoughts. Bob, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you, Rick.
So, Ann Coulter's saying that Trump's done. Stick a fork in him. You buy that?
No, I don't think he's done yet. I think he has some problems. What Ann Coulter, Rick, is expressing is what a lot of Republicans don't dare to express. Republicans in office, I'm talking about, not regular citizen, quote, Republicans, but I think they're afraid to, but I think she's expressing things you hear privately that people are actually not talking about Trump that much, hoping that he will, in fact, just simply not run.
Yeah, I watched some of his spiel over the weekend, and he didn't look like himself. He's losing a step, it looks like. And as time goes on, you're looking at another 2 years before the next election. I see that step getting even slower.
Well, there's an ego problem here too, as you know, how he operates. If in his mind, even though he says the election was stolen, they stole it from me, and if in his mind he believes that he could lose again, he just simply couldn't take it. So I think there is a possibility, and I don't think he's done yet, but I think there's a possibility he will create some type of reason that he won't run.
Yeah,
I've always thought that in the last 5 or 6 months.
You've also got Laura Ingraham coming out saying that she's not there yet for him. Not saying that she isn't, but right now she's not. And I think that's a big thing too.
Well, it is. And Ann Coulter is shocking people, but I think Ann Coulter sees the political writing on the wall in this sense. Right now, and let's just throw this out there, if Donald Trump wasn't doing what he's doing, now he's going after DeSantis because DeSantis is daring to say he may run, daring to do that. So he's angered Trump. So now he's dull. Anybody that angers Trump is something.
Yeah.
He'll say something about them because that's his ego. But I think what's happening here is that people like I said, like Ann Coulter, are realizing that if Trump would just stop all of this, the inner party fighting, because that's what he's doing, but nobody will hardly challenge him. If he would stop this, then the only device that is left out there is what's going on now. Manchin and Sinema, some of the progressives are mad at the president, some inner party fighting, some differences of the House and the Senate, etc. But if Trump continues this, it is to the Democratic favor. And I think Ann Coulter knows that. If Trump were to just be quiet, the Democratic side would have even a little bit rougher time.
No, I agree. If Trump had any inclination of party building or coattails, I really think that he could really cause a lot of trouble. I think the more chaos he creates, the better chance it is for Democrats to move forward. Now, Mitt Romney had a statement over the weekend about President Biden that he believes that Biden was elected to stop the crazy, but voters didn't want him to transform America. You think, is that an accurate statement, you think?
I don't think so. I think there's part of it that has some accuracy. And I was talking, to a Democratic friend today who actually sides with Mitt Romney, on this article, and we talked about this article today. And I think that, and my friend today said that, President Biden should realize that he's there because, Trump was so widely disliked. Well, even with everything that happened, Trump, could have won. He was disliked, but he could have won.
Yep.
So I think Romney is partially correct that there were a lot of people who, at one point in time, probably would have supported Trump, his behavior, his ego, his anger, his handling of the COVID. Which, if he had handled it different, I argue that he would still be president. But I think there's a certain amount of people that said this whole thing is crazy. And I think there's also a certain amount of people that think that the far right and the far left are, quote, out there. I'm not going to use the word crazy, but out there. And a lot of those people thought, Biden's kind of a, centrist, get-along guy, and he'll calm all of this down. So I think on that aspect, there's some, probably truth to what Romney says about that. On the second part, though, I don't think that Romney's correct that people expected Joe Biden to go in the White House and just, sit down in a chair and wave to everybody every day.
Yeah, no, I'm for those people. I want to know what policies has he pursued that he didn't say he was going to pursue on the campaign trail. He's done what he said he was going to do.
Correct.
And I guess this is the case of maybe you should listen to the candidates as they're. This is kind of why the campaigns are important. Find out who's going to do what.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think this is Romney's way of basically saying, look, let's do some things together. You've taken too many bold steps. You need to come to the middle. I think it's Romney's way to have some type of relevance.
Yeah, no, I agree.
In the whole process.
And to put himself into the news. But
right.
Ultimately, we're in a moment, and as I said, at the beginning of today's show, I used to push back on the name of my grandparents' generation being the greatest generation. I always push back on that because I was like, well, you know what? They rose to the moment. They didn't have a choice. They had to fight. World War II. They had to come back and fight for better opportunities. They didn't have really much of a choice. But now I'm looking at this moment and I'm going, no, I'm really now recognizing that generation as the greatest generation because they were able to rise to meet the challenges. We in this generation at this moment, we don't seem to be rising to meet our challenges, Bob.
Well, I think there's a weakness out there. Something I'm not understanding from, was in office 24 years, in Congress 11 of them. And something I'm not understanding right now is where's the political boldness to say, fine, we're going to take, the ideas we have, we're going to fight for them, do a reconciliation bill, take the heat, take a stab at it, I guess.
Do something. Who was that preacher that used to be on TV?
Yeah,
what was his name? Schuler or something like Schaefer? But he had this, don't just sit there, do something. I think of that guy all the time. I never listened to him other than that commercial. But do something, damn it.
My dad used to tell me do something even if it's wrong.
Yeah, I mean,
just do it.
My favorite Churchill quote is Americans always do the right thing after doing everything else first. Do something.
Right. And things have sat, for the last year, and, and it's, well, what's Manchin going to do, and what are we going to do next week, and how do we talk about this? Finally, it's just, you're either going to do it or you're not, and you got to make a move with it. Or if the whole Build Back Better America package as an entirety wasn't going to make it, you know what? Break it up into pieces and take each one of them forward with an agenda vote. Yeah,
it's and you got to do something. It just seems to be something's got to get done. Just my thoughts on it. I want to also get your thoughts on the January 6th Commission. And this happened several days ago, but they went and they asked Sean Hannity to come and cooperate. You said you were a little uncomfortable with that. What was your thinking?
I just think it's a political mistake because Hannity, despite what anybody may call him as an entertainment factor, is in the media. And, and the media has a wide ability, and sometimes I haven't liked it, to just say, well, it's my right, the amendment. I can, do this in the name of journalism. I'm not sure unless they specifically know that Sean Hannity had some hand and they can prove it in some type of organization of something that led to an attack. I'm just not sure I would politically want to give him, number one, the press coverage. Two, I'm not sure it ends anywhere.
Right.
What's the exit? Here would be my statement, Rick. What is the exit plan with Sean Hannity? Not him, Hannity. What's the Democratic exit plan of where they end up with Hannity?
I would argue the exit strategy is I'm a little uncomfortable with the kind of closeness some in the media on both sides of the aisle have with the coziness between power and the media. We've given the media a constitutional protection to keep the power in check. That kind of closeness concerns me. And that's the only angle that I can come up with is to try and make it that they were basically using Sean Hannity and Fox News as state-run media, and I have a problem with that. I think everybody would.
But I think we know they did that. They do. They did use them as state-run media.
But it seems we knew a lot of things. Like, for instance, and I wanted to get your thoughts on these supposedly 5 states that have forged documents for the Georgia, Nevada, Michigan, Arizona, and Wisconsin. Evidently, somebody sent forged documents certifying the election for Trump. Why are we now just learning about this, over a year later, and why is no one in jail for this?
I don't understand that. How this just, and Rachel Maddow unearthed, I think, didn't she, the documents?
Yeah, somehow they got a hold of them. But here's the thing. I remember back as this was all happening in December of 2020, hearing these stories that this was going to happen, that they were floating the idea of convening their own electors and sending their own alternative delegates. I remember that being already trial ballooned. I just didn't know that they sent it. I'm curious why, because I guess you would know this, where they send it to the National Archives, right?
National Archives, exactly.
And that the National Archives then has a copy of it. If they get 2 of them, one of them has got to be authentic, one of them has got to be a forgery. Why, in that moment, did not someone get arrested?
I don't know. I mean, whoever did it has obviously undertaken a forgery. And so what you now have is 5 forgeries. And I also don't understand why somebody hasn't been charged. I thought last week, finally, a sedition charge came, which is what was needed. If it's an insurrection, there's got to be a sedition charge. I'm wondering on this one, is there going to be a charge from the Justice Department at some point in time? It's a big deal to forge election certificates and give them to the National Archives. That's a big deal.
It is a huge deal.
They sent them to the government as if they were actual and as if they were real.
And there are 5 of them, Bob, which again, I come back to, and I'm not a conspiracy nut. 1, okay, 2, all right, maybe 2 people had the same idea. Maybe one heard it on the news, but 5?
Well, on this one, I am a conspiracy nut on this one because all of them match exactly the same format. They even, Rick, had the same font, the same spacing, and almost the exact same wording. That's not a coincidence. That's a plan.
Yeah, and didn't you throw in the Eastman memo? You throw in the PowerPoint. You throw in all of the speeches that Trump gave about getting it back to the House of Representatives. This seems, I don't know, just kind of saying, seems like, this seemed like a major coup attempt.
Well, I think it is. I mean, these documents were sent, and I have to assume that with today's technology, plus the fact that somebody at the archives has to receive them from someone, was it from the states themselves, who then gave them to the states and sent them out? I have to assume that can all be found out. And I have to assume it must be found out.
I want them in jail. Lastly, I wanted to get your thoughts. It's Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Are you as tired of seeing people who don't understand what King was actually talking about putting out quotes?
Now, in what sense is that?
I see people who aren't doing anything to help folks vote, putting out quotes of unity and quotes of equality.
I see. Right, and basically quoting the ideas of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., but not living them.
Yeah, it's where we are. It's frustrating. But
is.
Bob, as always, great stuff. I appreciate the time. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Rick.
Our good friend Bob Ney. No, look, as I said at the beginning, I'm so tired of the Lauren Boeberts and the Marjorie Trader Greens and all these people putting out statements on it's King Day. We care about the message, only to then turn around and attempt to undo everything that generation fought for. Interesting times we live in. And until we figure out how we're going to rise to the challenges of our day, I don't know it gets any better anytime soon. Because why is no one in jail? I'm still trying to figure that out. They literally, that's forgery. That's an actual crime. It's an actual crime. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. If you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you get the podcast. Make sure you get the podcast. Share. We don't want to have to sell beet juice. And it's an easy thing to do. Share with your friends and download the podcast. Also, you can get the app on your smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. And as always, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. By all means, follow us on social media at Rick Smith Show on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. Like, share, subscribe, all of that. Thanks so much for being here. Got a long, interesting week ahead. Can't wait.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
I never dreamed of growing up to be a political activist commentator, but here I am, and it worked out pretty well for me. I've been lucky enough to have a voice in public matters and eke out a modest living running my mouth as an independent populist agitator. Still, I have to confess to the sin of job envy. Not in the sense of being resentful, but regretful about my own inability to lift the trade of journalistic commentary to the heights attained by a small, feisty collection of unique public opinionators, political cartoonists. In framing issues and rallying people to think and act, these journalists have an unfair advantage over us mere word crafters. They can literally draw a picture to make their point. They reach masses viscerally as well as cerebrally, and visceral usually outpunches cerebral. Editorial cartooning is a profession made up largely of progressive mavericks who enter the social, political, cultural fray with an abundance of anti-establishment audacity, an eye for irony, fondness for the underdog, and an ability to laugh at absurdity, plus artistic talent. because cartooning is an expression of the human spirit that's been irrepressible since cave drawings. Generation after generation of pen and ink champions of democracy blossomed. The general public's appreciation and demand for the cartoonist's unblinking honesty and satire have never flagged, even increasing whenever the artists come under public assault by autocrats, plutocrats, screwballs, and assorted other censors. These graphic editorial artists matter. Again and again, they've roused the public to rise up and put down corporate and political scoundrels, incrementally advancing our nation's democratic possibilities. As in the natural world, though, even the most beneficial creatures can be driven to extinction. This is Jim Hightower saying, check your own local newspaper. Are your favorite cartoonists still there? The Hightower Radio Lowdown is brought to you by the Lowdown Happy Hour, live streamed from the Chat and Chew Cafe. Details at Hightower.